Good evening. Welcome. I'm John. I'm the event director at Literati Bookstore. We're pleased to welcome Aimee Nezhukumatathil in support of World of Wonders and in conversation this evening with Natalie Bakopoulos. Some Zoom etiquette. You heard me as you joined us, but we do ask that you keep your video off. You are muted. You'll be unable to mute yourself. And speaker view will probably be the ideal viewing experience. That way you'll just see whoever is speaking, on your screen at any time. As a reminder, the chat is closed for public chatting, but you may want to keep the chat window open. I'll be dropping links to purchase World of Wonders in the chat, and you can submit questions for a Q&A after Aimee and Natalie's conversation directly to me there at any time. So whenever the spirit moves you and you want to ask a question, feel free to submit that question into the chat, and I'll ask a selection of them at the conclusion of the conversation. As a reminder, you can purchase World of Wonders on our website, and I'll include a link to the chat there. And also, if you're watching later on YouTube, there will, of course, be links in the description below. You can also shop for more books at literatibookstore.com. Thousands of titles are available for curbside pickup if you live in Southeast Michigan. And in lieu of a book purchase, we'd also ask that you consider a $5 donation to sustain our virtual programming. Whether you'd like to think of it as this week's or this month's or this year's subscription to our programming, you can make a donation at literatibookstore.com/donation. Otherwise, we simply thank you for joining us in your attendance this evening or this morning or this afternoon, depending on wherever in the world you may be joining us from. And as a reminder, or not as a reminder, as a special note, if you purchase World of Wonders from literatibookstore.com tonight, and again, I'll be putting links in the chat, but if you purchase a copy tonight, Aimee will send one person that I will draw a name of a copy of Natalie Bakopoulos' wonderful new novel, Scorpion Fish. So if you want to be entered into a drawing for a free copy of Scorpion Fish, courtesy of Aimee Nezhukumatathil, purchase her book, World of Wonders, from Literati Bookstore tonight. So without further ado, I'll introduce our author and moderator. Aimee Nezhukumatathil is the author of 4 collections of poems, including most recently Oceanic, winner of the Mississippi Institute of Arts and Letters Award. Other awards for her writing include fellowships and grants from the National Endowment for the Arts, Mississippi Arts Council, and McDowell. Her writing appears in Poetry, the New York Times Magazine, ESPN, and Tin House. She serves as poetry faculty for the writing workshops in Greece and is professor of English and creative writing in the University of Mississippi's MFA program. And Natalie Bakopoulos is the author of The Green Shore, and her work has appeared in Tin House, the Iowa Review, New York Times, Granta, Plowshares, and the Penn O. Henry Prize Stories. She's an assistant professor of creative writing at Wayne State University in Detroit and a faculty member of the summer program Writing Workshops in Greece. She lives in Ann Arbor. Please join me in using your Zoom clap reactions to welcome Aimee and Natalie into your living room.
Thank you, John, for that, and thank you, Literati. I'm really happy to be in conversation with my dear pal and Writing Workshops in Greece colleague, Aimee Nezhukumatathil, about her wonderful new book, World of Wonders. And so, Aimee, I thought we'll just start off by asking you to talk just a little bit about the book and then maybe read something, and then we'll jump into conversation.
All right, thank you. I'm so excited to see you, Natalie. It's been, we've been texting back and forth through this whole pandemic, but it's just so nice to see you in person. And I'm still so salty that our annual seeing of each other did not take place in Greece, but in from our living rooms, from our offices together. So anyway, thank you all for tuning in. It's been a heck of a day, here. It is a day full of sadness since basically, what was it, about 1 o'clock here this afternoon with news of the Breonna Taylor ruling, and it's just been so heavy. Natalie, I was telling you, I don't even, it's just heavy. Every day there's a new thing to should I open my laptop to see the news for? So I would be remiss to not mention that has been weighing heavy on my heart for us all, and for the city of Louisville as well. So I have no smooth transition to this at all whatsoever, except for the fact that I wanted to give a big shout out to independent bookstores and indie publishers for being just the superheroes during this pandemic, for getting books out and still not even breaking stride during this pandemic. They have been just the superheroes of the literary world, and releasing a book in a pandemic, as you know, Natalie, is no joke. It is no joke. So I'm so grateful for readers. I'm so grateful for new voices that I'm seeing. I especially want to give shout outs to all the debut authors that are releasing books during a pandemic. And my book in particular has been just this like labor of love for many, many years. And Natalie, you saw me writing the last 3 years of it during the summers when we were together teaching on Thasos for the writers workshop in Greece together. And oftentimes we'd be at different tables, you know, overlooking the Aegean Sea. You're working on Scorpionfish edits. I'm working on World of Wonders edits. And what it is I had 200 plants and animals in mind that just brought me so much, such a hunger for curiosity to learn more about them. Even if I thought, oh, I know everything there is to know about an octopus, for example, I still wanted to be, I just wanted to, I had this insatiable curiosity to want to learn more. So from that list of 200 plants and animals, I whittled it down, and it was painful. I whittled it down to about 30. And the result is everything here in World of Wonders. And I've just been so thrilled to be able to work with this kind of brilliant Asian American illustrator, Fumi Nakamura, who did such an incredible, delightful job getting all of these illustrations just right. And it kind of really is a throwback to all those old textbooks from the 60s and 70s that I would find in libraries that clearly nobody had checked out in a while, but those were the books that I loved flipping through. And maybe there might be, if I was lucky, there might be one color for the entire book. And so I love that these were spot colored, designed by Mary Austin Speaker at Milkweed. You'll see the corpse flower has just one color, and that's a deep violet. Anyway, so I think maybe just I'm going to read a little bit here, and I think what I'm going to do is, how should I do this? What did we decide, Natalie? Should I show some of the pictures?
Yeah, absolutely. We can, if you'd like to show them as maybe after you read, or we can talk a little bit and then you can show some more, or however you would like to do it.
You know, let me show you right now while I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, good. Okay.
I teach on Zoom, and yet every time I share my screen, that's my one Achilles heel. So bear with me. I'm sharing my screen. Okay, good. Do you see it, Natalie?
Yeah, I see it.
Let me make it a little bit bigger. Because I'm such a type A nerd Capricorn, I have a whole presentation here. But let me scooch down.
Oh, this is wonderful.
Here's Natalie and I. This is quite literally overlooking the Aegean. This is this incredible program directed by this wonderful writer and dear friend, Christopher Bakken, and co-run by Allison Bakken. And Natalie teaches fiction there, and I teach poetry when it's not a pandemic. And this was our view. It was just, we had the most incredible students who really just brought to the table like their A game, right? Wouldn't you say, Natalie? Like, this was not like a working kind of vacation. Like, I had to bring it every single time. They were so smart. It just so happened that we had this view during workshop, you know? So, and this is in North Greece, on the island of Thasos. And yeah, that's the Aegean Sea. So it was just kind of this marvelous place to work on final edits. I think, Natalie, you saw like the first set of edits that I turned in was, you know, here at Thasos, and the next year I was like, oh, I'm still back to the drawing board, and I'm still working, you know. So this would have been my year, my first year to be able to enjoy this view without this looming deadline kind of sitting over my shoulder. You know, I don't even know what that's like, because the whole time I've been teaching in Greece, I've had these deadlines. So what can you do? Anyway, so I wanted to show you just a little bit, just a couple of examples of some of the illustrations here, because again, I had never really, what the Milkweed team did is, you know, when we were talking about the kind of the concept of the book and the whole premise of the book, I had said I had never seen an Asian American woman writing about the outdoors. And you know, anytime I had read these wonderful books, my parents would drop me off in the kids section, and then I'd sneak into the adult section just so I could read these science and nature books. I would be so excited to turn to the back, and it would never be a person of color, and rarely would it ever be even a woman. So it was super important to me to have not only a woman illustrator, but an Asian American illustrator. And Fumi just knocked it out of the park. She got every detail exactly right. So they're all biologically accurate. And there's maybe like, I don't know, 3%, 2% whimsy in there. This is the cassowary, one of actually the most deadly bird on the planet. And there was one in the Atlanta Zoo who I also was scheduled to go visit this summer, and I wasn't able to for the pandemic, but also he just passed away like last week, 2 weeks ago. Cecil, it was the oldest cassowary in the United States. So poor Cecil. And then the last one, Superb Bird of Paradise here. So anyway, I just wanted to show, I didn't plan on picking 3 birds in particular, but I just wanted to share some of the illustrations. So I'm going to stop sharing for right now. And yeah, I think I'm going to read just a little snippet so you get a taste, and then Natalie and I will just chat a little bit more, and then we'll finish up with questions. This is from my essay, The Vampire Squid, and I got to do a shout out. This is my favorite cephalopod. And I gotta give a shout out to that picture as well. All right, and I will just start out. The Vampire Squid. Way down deep in the perpetual electric night of the water column, a place where sunlight doesn't register time or silver filament, the vampire squid glides in search of a meal of marine snow. These lifeless bits of sea dander are actually the decomposing particles of animals who died hundreds and hundreds of feet above the midnight zone. The vampire squid reaches for the snow with 2 long ribbons of skin, which are separate from its 8 tentacles. If it is truly hungry, it trains its large eye on a glow, the lure of something larger, a gulper eel perhaps, or an anglerfish waddling through the inky water. The squid's eye is about the size of a shooter marble, but this is nevertheless the largest eye-to-body ratio of any animal on the planet. So it's basically like this giant eye floating in the deep, deep, deep sea. If the squid feels threatened or wants to disappear, perhaps no other creature in the ocean knows how to convey that with a more dazzling yet effective show. When the vampire squid pulse swims away, each of its arm tips glow and wave in different directions, confusing for any predator. To make an even more speedy getaway, the squid uses jet propulsion by flapping its fins down towards its mantle and simultaneously blasting a stream of water from its siphon, all of its arms in one direction. In the next stroke, the squid raises all of its arms over its head in what is called a pineapple posture. The underside of these arms is lined with tiny tooth-like structures called cirri, giving an appearance of fangs ready to bite down on anything that wants to chase it down for a snack. And as if that wasn't enough to shoo away a predator, the vampire squid discharges a luminescent cloud of mucus instead of ink. The congealed swirl and curlicue of light temporarily baffles the predator, who ends up not knowing where or what to chomp, while the vampire squid whooshes away meters ahead. It's as if you were chasing someone and they stopped, turned, and tossed a bucket full of large, gooey green sequins at your face. I wished I was a vampire squid the most when I was the new girl in high school. We had moved around for so much of my childhood, but the most difficult move I ever made was between my sophomore and junior years. I moved from a class of about 100 students in Western New York to well over 500 in Beaver Creek, a suburb of Dayton, Ohio. I went from sophomore class president to a little no one, a gal who tried out for the tennis team, not because I had any real interest in the sport, but because at practice, at least, I didn't have to be alone. I ate lunch in the library. I ate lunch in a stairwell hardly anyone used. I ate lunch in the dark enclave of the only elevator, hidden outside anyone's eyesight, except for the occasional student on crutches or in a wheelchair. Once, I ate lunch, my sad peanut butter and jelly sandwich, while standing up in a scratched and marked up bathroom stall. To pass the hour, I read the often vulgar, sometimes funny graffiti scrawled on the stall door, just so no one could see that I had nobody to talk to. This was my cephalopod year, the closest I ever came to wanting to disappear or sneak away into the deep sea. And I think I'll just pause there. And it goes on saying, like, you know, it was just the 1 year, but it was very palpable for someone who had not known that loneliness before ever in my life. I was always one of those kids who could make friends instantly. But that move in the middle of high school was so traumatic in some ways. And so it shaped my life, because now that I'm a teacher, now that I'm a professor, I can identify students who are just kind of a little bit on the outskirts or just a little bit more quiet, I think, than usual. So it became like this kind of blessing in disguise in some ways, that had I always just been going through life as, like, you know, class president, student council this, and you know, sports that, varsity, I would, you know, I don't know. I'd like to think I would still notice that, but anyway, so that's just a little small snippet of an example in the book of how I bring kind of the natural world and kind of zoom it in or stitch it in to something that happened in my life as well.
Oh, I love that so much, Aimee. I love that section. And as usual with these things, I have all these questions prepared, and then you read that, I'm like, okay, I'm going to start somewhere else than I thought about. I would like to talk to you about the origins of the book, but I think first I want to ask something very specific about the section that you read. I think later in that section, you say that of those moments that you were trying to write I'm trying to write my way into being. And I love that so much, this idea of an assertion of a self, the idea of this kind of like solitude as a cure for loneliness and writing as a cure for loneliness, and also an assertion of I am here, I'm taking up space. And I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about the idea of the both yourself as a nature writer and your ideas about nature writing, and how this period in your life that you read about being lonely and about being kind of almost ashamed to be the new girl in some ways, how that did that help shape you as a writer? Often we say writers are outsiders in one way or another, and that's why we assert ourselves in words or language.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's such a smart and, gosh, perceptive question. And I don't know if I can do it justice, but, you know, I think that was around the time in high school that I started to really, to just the beginnings of having the vocabulary for recognizing that as a child of the 70s and 80s and into the 90s, I had not seen anybody that looked like me, even remotely, outside in a forest or outside depicted in the desert or hiking up a mountain. Like, it was just such a weird absence. It sounds so funny now because my kids grew up with something like Dora the Explorer, you know, this Latina little cartoon having adventures. I would have died to have Dora, you know, just to know that there was a brown girl in a jungle somewhere. You know what I mean? Like, I laugh and kind of, it almost sounds just so crazy and ridiculous, but when you just don't see yourself in even any music video, you know, I loved MTV all the time. I never saw myself as like in the background of like any high school music video. David Lee Roth certainly wasn't casting Asian Americans, or at least not that I saw, you know, in the 80s videos of Jump and stuff like that. You know, I'm totally dating myself here, but it was just such an absence. And that was the beginnings. And I was still such a bookish person. So I just noticed, that was the time I noticed, like, where are all the Asian Americans? Forget even the outdoors. I just didn't see them, you know, and certainly, and I was a voracious reader. I was in AP classes, you know, and none of my teachers, even just as a side note, said, hey, do you know there's any living writers that, you know, there's any living poets, there's any living Asian American writers? Like, none of them even just put that, just even planted that seed in me. So that time was definitely a lonesome time, my junior year in high school, but it was also the beginnings of, I wouldn't even call them poems, because they were mortifyingly, like, astonishingly without music or metaphor or any concept really, but those are my first little scribblings of observing this. So I have, like, you know, I picture that scene in Beetlejuice where Winona Ryder is writing really furiously, like, I hate the world, I hate my stepmom, and stuff like that. That's what I was doing. I didn't have the monocle. I wasn't wearing all black. I was still cheery Aimee mostly, but I was definitely writing my frustrations and observations about the literary world as I saw it, you know, then. So, and I wouldn't even be able to put those things together until maybe years later after I had become a teacher. But that was definitely around the time when, and I didn't have the vocabulary for it back then, but I definitely was noticing it.
Right. You can't always know what you're missing. You know something is missing, but you can't always articulate it at a younger age, right? Or maybe you can, and it doesn't even seem possible, right?
Yeah.
There's something really I know that you were an editor, you were the poetry editor at Orion magazine, right? Mm-hmm. Which is a magazine on nature and culture and environmental issues and place. As you were, you know, moving into yourself as a writer and quite established, did it influence the way that you saw the genre of so-called nature writing and what that meant and who was doing it? And did that have any effect on wanting to write this book?
Yeah, you know, this had been bubbling on the surface for a while. So that the want of wanting to make this book happened before I became an editor. But definitely I can say, you know, and it was just such few times that we did have open submissions at Orion, because it was overwhelming. I was the one person looking at every poem, you know, so we didn't have, at the time we didn't have like a crew to, you know, to be first readers, that kind of thing. So I think one of the open reading periods happened while we were in Greece together, and I was like, oh my gosh, there's
this too,
poems, you know. And I looked at all of them. I looked at all of those. I don't know if I would recommend doing that again, but I looked at all of them. I will say that just from a sheer like numbers point of view, easily men submitted poems to Orion, easily 70 to 30, I would say. 70% to 30%. And that was through outreach from me and the Orion crew to marginalized groups, to women, to my extensive network of contemporary poetry. And it still was, okay, maybe 60-40, but I remember it was overwhelming. And, you know, it's not at all, you can check my track record, it's not like I did not publish men in the slightest. But I was definitely aware of, I even hate this word, but I was definitely aware that that I was a gatekeeper, you know, and I very much wanted to find people who had never published before, as well as people who were known names in nature writing. And then also I wanted to take a look at people who wouldn't normally be thought of as a nature writer, you know, but who wrote so beautifully about the outdoors, and I wanted them to have a chance to put their own stamp, you know, in the magazine as well. So I'm so proud of the fact that we had Indigenous folks, we had so many BIPOC folks throughout the 5 years that I was there, and I know that the current editor, Camille Denji, is only going to just go above and beyond that as well. But It is something I was absolutely aware of, and I think the whole editorial team was wanting to kind of change directions, just in terms of access. Who gets to write about the outdoors and who doesn't, you know? And I that was my chance to put my money where my mouth is. You know, if I'm going to sit here and complain about it, it better reflect in my editorial process. And I'm so proud to say that it did.
Yeah, that's really wonderful. And even the idea of what we think of as nature writing, I think there's an image, and I don't share this, but of maybe like, you know, Emerson and Thoreau and generally white men writing about the outdoors from a place of isolation or, you know, lonely walks in the woods. And also nature writing is also political, and it's about climate, and it's about, you know, environmental injustices and societal injustices, right? And so I think our view of nature writing as opposed to some little genre that's kind of shelved in its own little section in the bookstore is kind of opening up in different ways, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. One of the I was nervous, and the editors were all just embracing on this. You know, one poem in particular I remember being just slightly nervous about for that very reason, is because I think people have this perception of like, I'm going to be going into a meadow and I'm going to record my thoughts, and I have someone at home tending the fires for me so that I have all this time, you know, to be out there. And, you know, one of the very first poems I published within the first 2 years of my tenure there at Orion was by a poet named Fatima Ashgar.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and I can't ever do it justice here, but the gist of it is talking about how one of her guardians or an uncle put up fake flowers in an apartment courtyard gazebo just so that they could see flowers, you know what I mean? And it was like, they're plastic flowers, you know, that kind of thing. And so, it was so beautiful. And I was glad that it went through, and, you know, the whole editorial board. But yeah, I think that was, I think maybe it ruffled a few readers, like, how is this nature exactly? But I think once they step back and just see, like, look how we can broaden our definitions of what is outside and who also gets to write it. You know,
Yeah.
Fatima's a Muslim writer, and I hadn't really seen that represented as much as I would have liked to before.
I think what's so wonderful about your book, I mean, it's such a, you know, I don't know if the people listening and watching have read it yet, but it's just such a, and I'm sure that they will. It's so full of tenderness and depth and detail, and there's also this beautiful undercurrent of searching. So you have these beautiful descriptions of flora and fauna, and then suddenly there's this link to something in your life, and it becomes this almost like almost like you're kind of outlining your kind of constant sort of becoming as a girl, as a young woman, as a woman in a new marriage, as a new mother, and then through the eyes of your children. And I love the way that this, even though they're separate little pieces, the arc of this book, by the time I get to the sort of what I see as kind of a climactic moment, even to not to think like a fiction writer, and I sort of like subverting structure, but we get to this moment and then it tapers off, and it's so wonderful in the writing. Were you thinking about things like, I guess, thinking about how your personal narrative linked up with these creatures, or did it come sort of from the process of your writing about these? How do you see those two things working together as a writer of the environment and nature?
Yeah, you know, that's such a good question. I wish I had a more elegant answer for this, because
I'm sure it'll be elegant.
no, it really isn't. Honestly, my pitch to this, how I presented this out, how you know, my kind of elevator pitch is like, I just want to write descriptions of animals and plants that I love, like no memoir parts to it whatsoever. And it was met with varying degrees of interest. But the minute I said, okay, well, here's maybe 30% of my life in here, you know, that's when it was, that's when people are like, well, hold up, wait a minute, you know, I want this. And I was like, dang it, I've just shot myself in the foot, because I really had every intention on just making this almost just like little vignettes, descriptions of animals and plants, like almost like a bestiary, just straight out bestiary.
Yeah.
And then, so that's really what I started with in my list of 200 dream animal and plants. But in the course of writing these descriptions, of these plants and animals, it's so similar to my poems. I start with these images of the plants and animals, and then it just broadens up, and I leap to another thing. I leap to another thing. In this case, I leapt to autobiography. I leapt to myself, and so it was very organic in that way. I never sought out to be like, I am going to talk about violence against women and the flamingo. How do I do that? You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah.
Some people can do that, and I just bow down to them. But I think you saw, like, I mean, even writing 3 pages was like running a 5K to me. It was so hard to me. I'm so used to having everything just compressed and just really like every word. And I still hope I did that in this book. But even over a page, I just felt like, wow, I'm going to be boring people now, you know?
Not at all, right?
And, so it was really hard to kind of just expand that, but that's really where my mind goes. So I was wanting to write about the cactus wren, for example, and then it made me think, oh my gosh, when I lived in Phoenix, I remember that was the Stranger Danger, that was the Clifford the Crime Dog, that was when the first hearings of kids my age that were getting kidnapped in the 80s, or at least that's when it was becoming like there was commercials and warning billboards and stuff like that. So it became this natural thing as I was recollecting my time observing a cactus wren. How could I not remember, oh gosh, I was a latchkey kid. Parents didn't have any idea what was going on with me. At 10 years old, I was like keying into our house. And my sons now are horrified. I have an 8th grader and a 5th grader. And they're like, see, Mom, Grandma, you know, I used to, Yaya would let you do all of this. And and I sound like this old ancient person, like it was a different time then, you know.
We rode our bikes barefoot with no helmets.
Oh yeah, they can't believe I went without a helmet. So yeah, anyway, so it very much came naturally, and that also helped me whittle things down from the 200 to the 30. Anything where I felt like I was really stretching or really just putting like really just throwing a lasso around something to try to make a connection, that's when I was like, yeah, this just feels forced, I'm gonna put it aside. So the 30 that I have in this book are all just the most the plants and animals that I wanted to shout about, and also the one, and actually there's maybe two in there that don't have me at all in it, but these are the ones that I just it was like just such a burst of enthusiasm. I could feel myself smiling or almost like crying as I was writing them, and that was my litmus test. Anything where I was just flat while I was composing it was out.
That makes sense.
It's the closest thing I have to like chatting with a friend, you know what I mean? Like, so when you read this book, it's like I am just right there in front of you across the table just saying, look at this plant, you know, that kind of thing.
There's something really lovely about that, though, because you have the sort of the obvious or the kind of ostensible subject of the whatever plant or animal, and then the lyrical register takes it into these connections of what is really going on underneath, things about being hidden or overlooked or unheard or angry or lonely, and I love that so much. The way that the poems are all, I mean the essays, I'm sorry, feel like extended odes in a way, right? Like an ode is often about one thing and then there's something else going on underneath. And I heard, I think when you were speaking with, I think it was with Kiese Lehman, and he said something, you were talking about the tyranny of the line break, and that you wanted to, or the tyranny of the line. Yeah. And you wanted to kind of to allow these to kind of open up in a way, but yet they still have this wonderful poetic lyrical feeling that I think works so beautifully that you just can't escape your poetic self, right?
Thank you. It is, I mean, it is tough. It is, I mean, you of all people have heard me moan and complain. Just, you know, I say that with the line break, how freeing it was to not have to worry about that anymore. Yeah. And yet, even just, again, passing 3 pages on anything, I was like, I have nothing else to say. So I think that just naturally helped me condense these poems. I think no essay in here is longer than 5 pages. And that's partially, I'd like to say that was on purpose, but it was also partially because that's the point where I was starting to, anytime I felt bored, I was like, okay, we gotta, you know, end before I feel bored. So that's how it was. I mean, this is the closest thing to, like what I said before, this is this is the most intimate and closest thing I have to just wanting to say, look at the world.
Yeah, to show that kind of wonder, right? And it almost feels like I kept thinking of field guides, like a field guide to North American plants or whatever, where you get this little like kind of snippet in the photos. But there's also like a field guide to marriage, a field guide to becoming, a field guide to motherhood, all these beautiful guides there. Like, and I love, there's a section where I hope it's not giving too much away, but where it's kind of almost like a list essay of all the questions your boys are asking you. And some of them are super, super like, where's the bathroom? Like we need to know these basic things, but also these kind of existential questions about identity and race and their own kind of becoming that by the time I got to that section, I was sobbing. I just found the movement to that was so beautiful. So there's so many different layers that I really love here, but I kept thinking about this as a sort of field guide to many different things. I wanted to ask you one more question, Aimee, and then we'll go to the audience if they have any.
Oh gosh, it's like, I see talking with you is just, it's like, it's nothing. It's just this whole evening was zoomed by so quick. Okay.
It zooms by on Zoom. I was thinking that this book is also about kind of a search for you for a forever home, and something that as a child and as a teen who moved around a lot because of your parents' work, you didn't quite have a sense of one place, but it seems like through the various landscapes and the animals and the plants that you discovered, it was almost like the exploration of the outdoors was a kind of home. And I was wondering if you could, is that fair to say, or can you talk about that a little bit? Or?
Oh my gosh, you nailed it. That's exactly it. Thank you. You're so smart. It's just such a pleasure to chat with someone.
You're so smart.
So perceptive. No, not when it comes to prose. So I bow down to how you can put these threads together. I'm just crossing my fingers that hopefully they're working,
Oh, they're working so beautifully.
But, it's this is a place, I think I'm forgetting now how much of it I told you in person, just on our balcony chats in Greece, and how much you read in the book. But I will say that, growing up, again, I didn't have the vocabulary for it. I would watch my parents, who are like, my heroes for everything. And they're also the ones, I put this book is dedicated to them. They were the ones who first gave me this whole practice of wonder. And it is a practice. It's not like I wake up, in the middle of a pandemic and say, hey, everything was wonderful, that kind of thing. It's actually quite the opposite. I'm just so glad that I had their kind of training. They didn't know what they were training me for, but it ended up being to be a writer, this moment of never wanting to stop being curious about things besides yourself. You know what I mean? There's so, so they have multiple degrees. They're so super smart, both on the page and in the world. And yet I saw so many people treat them like, a cashier would be like, hi, do you speak English? You know what I mean? To my mom, who was like the first doctor in her area of the Philippines. You know what I mean? The first woman doctor in the Philippines. And I'd be like, wow, 6th grade, burning with rage. But I was also like, I'm ashamed to say, like, embarrassed a little bit, but also mad at the cashier, and then like mad at my mom. Why didn't she fight back? And the one place where nobody treated my parents like that, or my sister and I like that, was the outdoors. So whether it be my dad taking my sister and I hiking in the mountains in Arizona, and having all the names of every mineral we could find, my dad would know it, or every constellation, he was able to teach that to us. So no matter where I was, no matter where we moved, I didn't feel, yes, I feel lonesome, but I could always at least look to the sky and have a vocabulary for that. I could look outside and have a vocabulary for that. So it was a place of refuge. It was also a place where nobody asked me, like the catalpa tree never asked me, are you Portuguese?
Yeah, what are you, right?
What are you?
What are you? Yeah.
And also it was a place, like if we would go to nurseries, plant nurseries and stuff, that's where my parents shined. Like some of the workers at nurseries would ask my parents gardening questions, and and nobody would make fun of their accents there because they're master gardeners, you know what I mean? And so I don't know, I think probably just 40 years of internalizing that, and this is the result, that kind of thing. So, but it was very curious. As much as a place that was for refuge for me, I didn't see Asian Americans write about it. You know what I mean? And or at least my teachers didn't show me that you could write about it, that I had any agency in writing about it. And finally, I just, I was like, it was like just always simmering at the surface. And finally, I was like, I can't do poems anymore. I have to do this. I have to put this collection out there.
The moment in the book, I mean, there's so many moments in the book that I feel are like, oh, these moments of just transcendence. And I love fireflies. I just love them. And I love that the fireflies get the way that you sort of move through their kind of their descriptions and stuff. And there's this line that you say that they're saying, I am still here, you are still here, I am still here, you are still here. And I don't want to draw everything to a political moment, but there's this idea of wonder as witness, I think, that is also going on here in the sense of asserting yourself, and I am still here, and I am taking up space, and I'm still here. And that moment just, everything we read, we're reading within our own cultural moment and our own time. And I just kept thinking about that idea of I'm here. I just thought that was so moving and lovely.
Oh my gosh, it's so incredible to hear you say that, Natalie, because I mean, like I said, the spine on my own copy is not broken yet. So this is still so new and fresh. So hearing these ideas about that, I mean, I think that in that essay, I was focusing in on my mom.
Yeah.
But absolutely, I think that goes back to what I was saying before of just the books that I love so much. And it wasn't literature, it was nature books, I mean, the joke I make before, and it's absolutely true. I thought Dr. Seuss was one of my mom's coworkers. We did not have any books. When I say I didn't read kids' books, that means I didn't read kids' books. And so, so yeah, it was that lack of not seeing anybody who looked like me in the books that I loved, so it's absolutely could be read that I am here, you are here, I am here, you are here, saying that, hey, brown girls like the outdoors too,
Yeah. And I know that wasn't the what that essay was about, but I kept thinking of those things. There's so many moments of just, even like when you talk about not being heard, and then later in the book you talk about moving through the hallway with the click of your heels as your mother's, this idea of like, here I am, I'm coming with my, here I come down the hallway, I'm taking up space. And I thought that was just so, all these connections, and just the idea of connections in this book, the trees, the underground system of tree communication, and the echolocation, and knowing that you're a young girl in Kansas, and your later to be husband is, dribbling his basketball somewhere down the way. I just was like, there's so many connections here. It's just so, I mean, it's organic. But it's just, you could just go on and on with this book. So, Aimee, I want to, we could keep talking and talking and talking, and I would love to, but we have an audience here, and they might have some questions for us. So, sure. If there are any, if not, we can.
We have a few questions, and I'm happy to start reading them. The first question, I think, maybe touches on something, Aimee, you were already speaking to. So I apologize if I'm asking you to repeat yourself. The question is, as a fellow Malayali, the outdoors aren't something necessarily valued and sought out by our parents for us to experience. What drew your parents to have you and your sister get those experiences with nature?
Such a good question. And I wish my dad could be on Zoom, because he's really truly the only one who could answer that, because it is unusual, even from he's the oldest son from his giant family of 7 kids, and he was also the first one to want to come to America, so he was always kind of like the different one in his family. But his degrees are in biology, and so I don't know, and someone had mentioned this on a previous thing. I need to ask him while he's here to just say like why. I think he would be he's so private, and he would be so embarrassed, and he would never say it was anything on purpose. But he also too came to this country really with not a giant support group here. I think there was like one uncle that he had. Otherwise or maybe 2 uncles. Otherwise he was kind of on his own, seeking his own way in this world. And I think he turned to the outdoors as a place to kind of feel, like, oh, let me see if I could grow this plant from India here in my apartment in Chicago, in downtown Chicago. And he just happened to meet a Filipino woman who shared that same love, and their love language, no matter how many squabbles and stuff they had, their love language was gardening. And being a product of that union, I also want to mention and be true to it that, when I was in junior high, I'm not going to lie, the last place I wanted to be was hanging out with my parents in a garden nursery. It was very much like, oh, eye rolling, like, why are we here? I'm so, I don't want to be seen here. Please drop me off at the mall, but I also saw that was their absolute, it's like they could breathe, they could unclench, they could, from their high stressful jobs. My dad was a respiratory therapist, my mom is a psychiatrist, for the criminally insane. And so when they got home, that was their place that they could just be, and nobody would, call them terrible names. Nobody would make fun of their accents. So I think that was their kind of like place of joy, and also curiosity. So what is this strange land that we're raising a family in? Let's learn the botany, and let's learn the animals here too. So it is very unusual, and I would say even in my both my sides of my family, my Indian and Filipino side, I am the only one who's not in the like science or medical kind of fields, that kind of thing. So I don't know. My dad is the one who could definitively answer that one. Thank you, though, for that question.
Thank you. The next question: given similar themes between your essays and your poems, how do you know which pieces need to become essays and which need to become poems? Do you purposely sit down thinking, this is an essay for the World of Wonders project before starting a piece, or did some go elsewhere and end up in Oceanic or earlier books?
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a good question. And the same concept is actually on both. It's so hard for me. It still was very hard. If someone were to give me an assignment, say, I need 500 words on the narwhal tomorrow, go. That would be, I could do it, but it would be super, super hard. What I can do, though, is start with an image if it's poetry, or start in a scene if it's going to be prose. And I don't know exactly where it's going to be, or what form it'll be. I actually don't know until the end. So my MFA is actually in both poetry and nonfiction. It just so happens that most of my early success was always in poetry, so my focus kind of was in poetry. But I had been writing essays here and there, since grad school. And I think just something happened, though, very specifically in 2016. I just could not, I think it was after the election, and I think many writers felt this way. I don't know, Natalie, if you felt this way too. I couldn't write for about 2-3 months after the election. And what little bits and pieces I could, nothing was finished. I couldn't finish a draft. And then finally, it just became a thing where I did not want to listen to a line break. I did not want to have to even figure that out anymore. So the gist of it is I can breathe easy in both genres, but in essays is when I need to exhale fully, and just take that giant breath out of my lungs. That's when I know it's going to be towards an essay. When I love the compactness and the precision, that's when I know I want to make it more crystalline. That's when I want to put it in a poem.
The next question, do you read women nature writers, poets of other cultures to compare with the lacunae or absence in what you did not find of their presence in Anglophone or contemporary American writing?
I do. Not nearly as much as I want to. We just started up here. I teach full time, and my entire family now is online. So just helping manage. Again, my 2 sons, they're at any given time in my household now, starting from late August. It has been 4 Zooms going on at once. It's craziness. And it's not normal. It's not how I ever want to really be. So my reading time has decreased, but I would say the book, she's an indigenous writer, and the one I just keep going back to again and again is Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. It's also by Milkweed, so I feel like this is a commercial, but this is before I ever had a connection. Her writing was just, again, it's like that old Emily Dickinson quote. I felt like the top of my head had been taken off. I just had not seen any writing like this. And so that was huge for me. I need to read more. The writers I read from other cultures are more scientists, so like or environmentalists. Although there's like Vandana Shiva, an environmental activist. I love her from India. I love her writings as well. But I definitely need to do more. Yeah. What else?
There's a question here. I love the idea of the collection as a field guide and a search for home. Would you mind speaking on the idea of wonderment as a dialogue between nature and identity?
Yeah, gosh, that's such a good smart question. I could do, a whole other lecture on that. But what I would say is, well, it's revealed in the book, and I've said it before in interviews, and it's not a secret. The place where I think the metaphor I used was, I felt like magnets in me just like snapped to attention. It felt like just something fit. Of all places that I've been to, it was here in Mississippi. And so if you would have asked me that maybe 5 years ago, I would have been like, wait, what? Just from my own lack of knowledge about this state, my own ignorance, and the way Mississippi is portrayed in the media. Honestly, I feel safer here than in any other place I've been to. So I know that might sound strange for people. I'm not Black. So I'm aware that Mississippi is a very complex, complicated place, but I can't think of a better endorsement except for the fact that this was the only place that I wanted to raise my children, and to be in a place like my son is in an orchestra with Indian and Vietnamese and Muslim classmate buddies. They play chess together, and Latino friends from my youngest, and my youngest has friends that are in government, that need government assistance. And then he has friends who get a golf cart on their 16th birthday, or on their 12th birthday, actually. So it's a super complex and super diverse place where I live. But I would say that moment of wonderment for me, connected to my identity and maybe to my family's, it's just, I couldn't be outside as much as I wanted to be in Western New York. And I lived there for 15 years. And, for that and many other reasons, it was also the place that I had the most just flat out racism and microaggressions. And people think of New York State as, oh, it's a blue state, but Western New York was one of the scariest places I've ever been. And it tells you something when I never look over my shoulder here in Mississippi, and I did that all the time in Western New York. And I was also afraid for my sons in Western New York in ways that I'm not here. So I want to say that, and I say it proudly, because I think, again, I had no idea that Mississippi could be like this. And and again, I know that this is a complex place, but I will say that when we first moved here, my youngest was in second grade, and one of his very first field trips was to the Lorraine Museum, the Lorraine Hotel, which is now a museum, the place where Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. And I thought, I'm used to these, like, let's go to the zoo, let's go, to this like very very low-key kind of place. So I was kind of appalled, and I realize now how grateful I am. They took these second graders out to the balcony, the very balcony where Martin Luther King was assassinated, and they gave the whole tour. Like, this is where he stood when the bad man across the street, shot him in the neck, and and that kind of thing. And they did not tamp it down for a second grade audience. I thought they'd say like, oh, something bad happened here. They did not. And so I would say that discussions of race are more direct here in Mississippi. And again, it has plenty of problems still. It has a long way to go. But I so appreciate the directness here in ways that this kind of weird, couched, covered sense of what are you? Hey, I think you're awesome. Namaste is what they would say to me in the post office, and it's like, I'm not, like I'm Methodist, that kind of thing. So that doesn't happen to me here in Mississippi. Nobody asks me what I am. Nobody says namaste to me in Mississippi. So it's a big, long answer to your question. But like I said, it's a big, big question. I so appreciate it. And Mississippi is the place where I just feel so much at home.
And then I think we'll end with just one more question from the poet Christopher Beck. And there are so many reasons why I love your writing, Aimee, and yours too, Natalie. Listening to your conversation tonight, I keep thinking about an offhand sentence Elizabeth Bishop writes in a letter to Marianne Moore. She says, quote, "Marianne, you and I see what others carelessly overlook." That has always seemed like a great description of what a great writer does, and it certainly applies to you both. I wonder if you can speak a little bit about the importance, or maybe the art, of careful looking, Aimee, which seems so important to both your poetry and prose.
Thank you. Oh, Christopher, hello, and hello, Theo, if you're still awake, and Allison as well. It's just something that has been modeled. My parents they would never consider themselves writers. They would never consider themselves wanting to have a daughter who is a writer. I think this, Christopher, but for everybody else, they absolutely were hoping that I would turn into a doctor somehow magically. Maybe they were too good at taking me outdoors, and too good at showing me the practice of wonder. But I would say that it has given me a chance, even if I wasn't a writer, what I'm so grateful for having that practice of just being able to be still, being able to not be dependent on electricity for my entertainment or my art. And it's something I joke with my grad students about, but it's kind of true. Like, as long as you're physically able to do so, don't feel like you need to have your phone to look things up, or you need to have your laptop. Like, writing is one of the most all you need is a pen and a paper. And that has been my sense of joy for, decades, is a pen and a paper. And there's something about, you feel less lonely in the world when you are noticing. There's so many wonders out there to be noticed, to be had. And what is that? I'm going to butcher this quote by Chesterton. I need to know this by now, but it's like, humanity won't suffer for lack of wonders in the world, but they'll suffer for lack of wonder. I'm sure I butchered that somewhere, but, and I see it with people's sense of boredom, dissatisfaction. My husband and I joke, like, it's not ideal. The pandemic is far from ideal. That's the understatement of the year. But I'm so happy in some ways to be in a place, I don't know. No, I don't want to even say anything positive about the pandemic, but except for the fact that I can still, because I've had years of practice of doing this, I could still find wonder, and I could still find joy in the small things that people maybe overlook. Watching, I think I put this in my book. In fact, I know I did. The boys in the summer, we have like this sad little inflatable pool, just because we couldn't go out to a pool and we didn't have the sea. We didn't have the Aegean Sea. Just seeing their footprints on our tiled floor. At first, my first reaction is like, you didn't wipe your feet, But at the same time, I was like, it took my breath away. And not to get maudlin here, but it's the honest to goodness truth. It took my breath away. I helped make something that has a footprint, like a footprint is such a magical thing to see. You know what I mean? And I don't know. I just think of myself 19 years old, not knowing at all what I wanted to do with my life, definitely not wanting even kids, definitely not even knowing if I'll get married. And now I have wet footprints in my kitchen, I don't know what I'm trying to say, except for the fact that it saves me on the darkest days, that I can still find wonder and find joy in unexpected places. And I don't want to force that on everybody, because I know that even that statement is a place of privilege. I had parents who, as hard as they worked, they were present ultimately. I joke that they never read me bedtime stories, but I knew that they cared for me. I was provided for. But now my turn is that how can I help make that happen for other people? How can I help teach my students to have wonder, as jaded as sometimes they can be? How could I teach my children to have wonder in an age of electronics and staying home? So I take it as a responsibility, not just like a look at me, I can do this, but now what is my small gift that I can give back to this planet?
Aimee, you do something really that just made me think of one thing you do so beautifully, is that you talk about wonder as detail and attention and joy, but you also talk about it in terms of fear and uncertainty and kind of accepting those things. And I thought that was such a beautiful kind of balance that you were doing in this book too.
Oh, thank you. That means so much, because I think a lot of times people are like, I can't read about just plain joy here, or I can't, like I am, depressed. I just lost somebody, or I know someone who passed on. This book does not, and I also don't like the books that are very polemic, or like my way or the highway. You need to do this, and you need to recycle this, or XYZ will happen. Other people can write those. That's just not me. I don't respond well to that, in particular too, on the reading edge. And I didn't want to write that like it's my way or the highway either. There is a lot of unanswered questions in this book, and a lot of sadness and plain fear, and I think it's important to acknowledge that I'm not a scientist. I don't have the answers. I just have a lot of questions. And I'm just so grateful to be able to have a forum where I can raise these questions, and kind of join in on the conversation of the environment and the outdoors, one that I had been on the outside kind of looking in all my life, essentially. So I'm happy in whatever small way to be able to add my voice now.
Well, that's the end of our questions, and we've reached the top of the hour. Thank you both for just a really lovely evening and conversation. We're so grateful to host you both at Home with Literati. You can purchase Aimee Nezhukumatathil's World of Wonders at Literati Bookstore and .com. And then if you purchase it tonight, you can be entered to win a copy of Scorpion Fish, courtesy of the author. Thank you both again. Thank you to all who joined us this evening. And we hope that you continue to stay safe and take care, and we'll see you at the next event.
All right.
Hi, Christopher. It's nice to see people turning on their videos. Bye, everyone.